There are mornings when the world feels freshly ironed, creases smoothed, corners tucked, nothing out of place. This was one of those mornings, at least, until it wasn't. I'd gotten up early, brewed strong coffee in my chipped mug, and carried the ritual out to the porch. Our old golden retriever, Buddy, thumped his tail on the steps, eyes following every move as if he were memorizing my habits for some canine biography. It was his thing: silent observation, endless loyalty, mild judgment. I was feeling oddly proud of myself after weeks of silent wars with my adult daughter, Allison, and even frostier breakfasts with my husband, Greg. I was determined to reset the tone. My plan: make pancakes, act cheerful, pretend like our family wasn't unraveling over 1,000 tiny resentments. Who knows, maybe I'd even apologize for whatever I was supposed to apologize for this week. The first sign of trouble came disguised as kindness. I bent to refill Buddy's water, only to feel a sharp, burning prick on my wrist, like a sewing needle dipped in fire. Probably a splinter, I told myself, refusing to dignify it with more attention. In this house, complaining was considered a competitive sport, and I'd retired undefeated. Inside, the kitchen was already thick with the sound of Allison slamming cabinets. She'd moved back, temporarily, 8 months ago after her divorce, filling the house with her heartbreak and a mountain of Tupperware. Greg was, as usual, hiding behind his newspaper, occasionally clearing his throat like punctuation. It was all very American Gothic if you squinted past the Target decor. By the time I'd flipped the first pancake, my hand was tingling. Buddy had stationed himself by my feet, nose twitching, ears alert. His gaze was locked on my wrist, brows knitted in that worried way dogs have, more earnest than any human apology I'd heard all year. "Mom, are you okay?" Allison asked, but her voice was mechanical, the concern almost an afterthought. "I'm fine," I lied, as every mother does. "Just a little cramp." She rolled her eyes. "You should rest. Let me cook for once." Oh, the irony. She'd burned pasta the night before, nearly set off the smoke alarm, and now wanted redemption by way of pancakes. I gave in, more from exhaustion than generosity, and slid into a chair. That's when the room tilted, just a fraction, like the world had lost its axis. Buddy's nose pressed insistently into my lap. Greg looked up, finally. "Are you getting sick?" I tried to answer, but my tongue felt thick, heavy. My vision fuzzed at the edges, like a photograph developing all wrong. Still, no one moved except Buddy. He pawed at my arm, almost desperate. I glanced at my wrist, already red, swelling. Not a splinter. Not a cramp. Something much worse. The kitchen closed in, everyone talking, no one listening. Buddy whined louder, then barked. His voice cut through the static, his eyes pleading. That's when I realized he knew. But would anyone believe a dog, when the family never believed each other? What happened next changed everything. What if the one who sees the truth is ignored again? Sometimes it takes a disaster for secrets to come clawing out into daylight. Symptoms and denial. When did my body become a stranger? That morning as I sat at the kitchen table, my own hand didn't look like mine. The swelling on my wrist pulsed with each heartbeat, and a strange numbness crept toward my fingers. Greg, predictably, turned back to his newspaper. In this family, crises were handled with denial and coffee refills. Buddy, however, wouldn't leave me alone. He paced, whined, and nudged my arm with a persistence only a dog can muster. It was the kind of concern you can't fake, not even for a treat. My family, on the other hand, seemed to have their own performance schedule. "Mom, you look pale," Allison said, her voice more accusatory than worried. "Are you sure you're not overreacting? Last week you thought you had Lyme disease because of a freckle." Her sarcasm stung almost as much as the bite. But she was right about one thing: I did have a tendency to catastrophize. I was the one who triple-checked the locks, bought extra batteries before every storm, and sniffed milk 2 days before expiration. Maybe I was making a scene. Maybe I just needed to breathe. But Buddy kept at it, barking sharply and nudging my hand. Greg sighed. Do you need a doctor, or is this another one of your episodes? If emotional support was an Olympic sport, my husband would be the anti-coach. I tried to stand, but the kitchen floor undulated beneath me, and my legs folded like a broken lawn chair. Buddy whined louder, placing himself between me and the door as if he could anchor me in reality. It was Allison, surprisingly, who caught my elbow. Mom, sit. Your lips are blue. Seriously, what's going on? I glanced down, my fingertips tinged purple, the swelling up to my elbow. A cold sweat broke out. The dog's bark turned frantic as darting between my face and the spot on my wrist. Greg finally stood up, folding his newspaper with the deliberate slowness of a man avoiding the obvious. Should we call someone? He muttered, as if the answer could be found between the obituaries and the sports section. I wanted to scream, call someone, anyone, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. I heard my own voice slur spider. The word felt alien thick. A glance at my wrist and I caught the telltale twin puncture marks. Buddy saw them too. He barked and pawed at the bite, whining in distress. For a moment his panic was contagious. Allison finally dialed 911, voice trembling as she spat out her address, words tumbling over one another. Greg hovered in the doorway, guilt and helplessness written on his face. What kind of spider? He asked as if it mattered. Maybe you should have worn gloves in the garden. It would have been funny if it wasn't so cruel. My head throbbed with a pressure that made every noise feel distant and muffled, like listening to your own life through a closed window. The paramedics arrived quickly, their voices urgent, hands moving with practiced speed. Buddy tried to follow, but Greg blocked him, muttering about hygiene. I watched Buddy's face press to the glass as the world tilted once more, and the paramedics whisked me away. It was in that moment, somewhere between consciousness and blackness, that I wondered, how many times had I been ignored in this house because I wasn't loud enough, dramatic enough, or just not the right kind of victim? Buddy never stopped barking, not even as the ambulance doors slammed shut. This time, his warning might be the only thing that saves me, or finally tears us all apart. How do you prove the truth when your only witness has 4 legs? Sometimes the smallest voice is the one that breaks the silence and the family. The silent alarm. In the sterile, humming cocoon of the ambulance, I found myself wrestling with a pair of emotions I knew too well: fear and resentment. Fear, because venom surged through my veins, hijacking my body with each pulse. Resentment, because it took this to finally get my family's attention. The paramedic's face hovered above me, all sharp lines and urgency. His gloved hands moved with clinical efficiency, but his eyes flicked to my wrist and widened. Possible recluse or widow bite, he murmured to his partner. We need anti-venom ready at county. My own voice was little more than a garbled croak. Dog. Buddy, he saw. They gave polite, practiced nods as if to humor the delirious. For all our cleverness, I thought, we humans are still so quick to dismiss what doesn't fit the script. And in our house, the script was simple: ignore, deflect, survive another day. The hospital was cold, smelling of disinfectant and muted panic. Machines beeped their own private Morse code. Doctors floated past in rushed clusters, and I drifted between flashes of consciousness. I heard snippets: Allison's anxious voice, Greg's low rumble, the urgent shuffle of nurses, but always in the spaces between, I kept searching for the familiar thump of paws, the comforting warmth of Buddy's presence. But dogs weren't allowed in ERs, even when they knew more than the people inside. When I next woke, Greg was seated at the foot of my bed, his face ashen and drawn. He held my hand as if it were a task on a checklist. They said it was close. The venom, well, it could have been worse if Allison hadn't called when she did. He paused, voice brittle. You scared us. I wanted to laugh or cry, but my throat burned. Buddy, I croaked. Greg blinked, slow as syrup. That mutt went berserk after you left. Scratched up the door. Nearly bit the neighbor when she tried to walk in. Allison says he's never acted like that. Somewhere between a complaint and a confession. Moments later, Allison burst in, her hair wild, eyes rimmed red. I'm sorry, Mom, she said, words tumbling out. We should have listened. I thought you were just being you. I never thought. She looked so young then, so much like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after a nightmare. For a heartbeat, I wanted to reach for her, but shame and exhaustion weighed my arm down. I should have listened too, Greg muttered, avoiding my eyes. But you always worry. It's hard to know when it's real. My mind spun, not just from venom but from years of being tuned out. Was this our family legacy, a mother ignored until disaster struck, a daughter grown hard from disappointment, a husband so desperate for peace he missed the alarm? But Buddy had known. Buddy had tried. That night, as moonlight stretched shadows across the hospital floor, the truth crystallized. Sometimes the loudest alarm comes from those who can't speak at all. And sometimes it takes nearly dying to be heard. Buddy was waiting at home, nose pressed to the window, tail still intense. What he did next would force this family to finally listen or risk losing everything. What would you sacrifice to be heard by those you love most? When the truth claws its way in, even the walls have to listen. Buddy's protest. The morning after my brush with death, I came home to a silence so thick it could suffocate. Greg had driven me, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, radio off, just the thrum of his own guilt filling the car. Allison trailed us in her battered Honda, face pinched and unreadable, clutching her phone like a shield. I opened the door expecting the usual routine, Buddy leaping, tail wagging, whining with the pure relief of reunion. Instead, I was greeted by chaos. The hallway rug was shredded, muddy paw prints tracked across the floor, and my favorite slippers, Greg's old gift, were in pieces at the threshold. Greg swore under his breath. That dog's gone crazy. I'll call the trainer. Or the pound. Don't you dare, I snapped, voice ragged, new steel in my chest. If it weren't for him, I might not be here. Buddy appeared in the doorway, fur bristling, eyes bloodshot with exhaustion. He whined, pressed his nose to my wrist, then looked me straight in the eye as if to ask, do you get it now? For a moment, the whole world funneled down to that single gaze. I knelt, tears stinging my raw skin. I'm here, boy. I'm here. Allison hovered at the edge, phone still glued to her hand, scrolling through a stream of articles. Dog predicts owner seizure. Pet sense illness before humans. She paused. Mom, look at this. Some people say dogs can smell infection, maybe even venom. It's real. Greg wasn't convinced. He's a dog. He was scared. That doesn't make him a hero. Buddy growled, low and steady, never breaking eye contact with Greg. It wasn't aggression, it was accusation. The kind of soul delivers when words fail, but the truth can't wait. My wrist still throbbed, wrapped in sterile white, a reminder of how close I'd come. The bite had changed something in me, something deeper than skin. For years, I'd let myself become background noise in my own home, the mother who fussed and fretted until everyone tuned her out. But Buddy had listened, and more, he'd acted. That afternoon, as Greg stomped around with a garbage bag, cursing about ruined shoes, Buddy staged his protest. He planted himself in front of the kitchen, blocking Greg's path, refusing to move. No amount of scolding, treats, or threats worked. When Greg tried to shove him aside, Buddy nipped his pant leg, not breaking skin, just making a point. Allison gasped, her voice shaky. Dad, maybe he's trying to tell us something. For the first time, Greg looked rattled. Not angry, just lost. Dinner was a quiet affair. I picked at my food, watching the family try to settle into old habits, but the air had changed. Buddy paced beneath the table, head low, body tense. He kept glancing from me to Greg, to Allison, to the bandage on my wrist, like he was tallying our failures. Finally, after a long silence, I set my fork down. We need to talk. All of us. Greg rolled his eyes. Not another family meeting. Not a meeting, I said, voice flat. A reckoning? I nearly died, Greg. You almost lost me because you wouldn't listen. And Buddy, he saw what you refused to see. Allison's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Mom. Really. I didn't know how to help you anymore. Greg's defenses cracked. What do you want from me? I tried to keep things together, but you always make it about the worst case scenario. For a second, I wanted to scream. Instead, I looked at Buddy. He sat up, alert, as if waiting for a cue. Maybe, I said quietly, sometimes the worst case is the case. And the only one who really saw me was the one who can't speak. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Buddy pressed his head into my lap, exhaling as if he'd finally delivered his message. But the real reckoning was yet to come. What Buddy did next would force our family to choose, listen or lose each other for good. How far would you go to save the ones who keep pushing you away? Sometimes the only way to heal a family is to break it first. Breaking point. The night pressed in like a punishment. Outside, thunder rolled in distant, empty threats. Inside, I lay in bed, pulse echoing in my wrist, the house creaking with old resentments. Greg hadn't come to bed. Allison was still awake, light bleeding under her door. Buddy sprawled at my feet, restless, his eyes fixed on the shadows as if he expected something to crawl out. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time we'd all laughed together. The answer was buried beneath layers of routine, half-finished conversations, and the constant buzz of life's little emergencies. My body ached, and not just from venom. Downstairs, a crash splintered the silence, a plate, maybe, or Greg's patience finally shattering. I crept out of bed, Buddy padding behind, soft but insistent. At the foot of the stairs, I heard Greg's voice, low and tight, followed by Allison's sharper reply. I'm done, Dad. I'm done pretending nothing's wrong. Her voice cracked. You almost lost her and you can't even admit it. Buddy slipped past me, nails clicking. Greg was in the kitchen, back hunched, head in his hands. Allison stood across from him, arms crossed in that stubborn shield I knew too well. Why is it always up to me? Greg muttered. Why do I have to hold everything together? He glanced up, saw me, fell silent. I stepped into the light, exhaustion dripping from every word. Because you decided you had to. Nobody asked you to do it alone. Allison shook her head. We never talk about anything real. We just survive. Until something breaks. Buddy circled Greg, then sat, staring up at him with the unwavering patience only a dog can muster. Greg met his gaze, something inside him softening. For a moment, he looked like a man lost in his own home. Buddy whined, pawing gently at Greg's foot. Greg's voice was a whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to believe you were in danger. For the first time in months, Allison stepped forward and put a hand on Greg's shoulder. We're all in danger if we don't change. I felt tears sting, but let them fall. Sometimes you have to let something break before you can fix it. Buddy leaned into my leg, warm and solid. He's been trying to warn us for years, I said, stroking his head. Maybe we should finally listen. Upstairs, the house sighed. Downstairs, for the first time, so did we. But the wounds were still raw, and the real healing hadn't even begun. Is forgiveness just a word, or a choice you make every day? When everything falls apart, who do you trust to pick up the pieces? 6. Unspoken truths. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen like a truce flag. I found Allison already there, making coffee with Buddy curled protectively at her feet. She looked up, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but there was something softer, less brittle in her face. "Morning, Mom," she said, voice tentative. I sat across from her, the bandage on my wrist a badge I hadn't asked for. For a moment we just sat, the silence awkward but not hostile. "I read more about spider venom," Allison finally said, pushing her phone across the table. "You could have died." I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I made you feel like you were overreacting." I nodded, swallowing a wave of emotion. We all did. Even me. I stopped trusting myself. Buddy nudged my ankle, then moved to Allison, resting his head on her knee. She laughed, choked and watery. "He's the only one who always gets it right." Greg appeared in the doorway, rumpled and hesitant, holding a battered box. "Found this in the garage," he said, setting it on the table. "It's Buddy's adoption papers. Old photos. Maybe we need to remember why we're together." We rummaged through the box, pictures of Buddy as a puppy, notes scribbled in childish handwriting, Allison's first collar for him, Greg teaching him to fetch. Each memory stitched something back together, a quilt of forgotten warmth. Greg finally cleared his throat. "I want to do better. I want us to listen more. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when we'd rather look away." For the first time, I believed him. We took Buddy for a walk that afternoon, together. Neighbors watched from their windows, perhaps expecting the usual cold procession. Instead, we laughed at Buddy's antics, told stories about the worst family arguments, and admitted to old mistakes. With every step, the poison, both literal and emotional, lost its hold. Sometimes healing begins in the smallest of gestures. But every wound leaves a scar. And some secrets still waited to be spoken. What if it took a loyal heart to remind us what family truly means? Sometimes the greatest rescue isn't survival, but forgiveness. Second chances. The anniversary of the bite arrived quietly, folded into the rhythm of daily life. The house felt lighter now, though the old scars remained, a broken plate glued together, a rug with stubborn paw prints, a wrist that still ached in the rain. Buddy had grown a little grayer around the muzzle, but his eyes sparkled, especially when we gathered in the living room. Greg brought out an old tennis ball, Allison had a new job, and I finally felt present in my own skin. That night, as we sat together, Greg surprised us all. "I owe you an apology, Buddy. And to both of you. I was scared of being useless, so I just stopped listening. But you never did." He knelt, awkward and stiff, and Buddy licked his face in approval. Laughter bubbled up, honest and unforced. For the first time, forgiveness didn't feel like surrender, it felt like freedom. Allison leaned into my side. "If it's true that dogs can sense danger, maybe they sense love too. Maybe they know when we're finally ready to try again." I kissed the top of her head, feeling a quiet peace settle. If he can forgive us, maybe we can too. We made a toast that evening, not to perfect families, but to second chances. To listening, even when it hurts. To the dog who saved my life and reminded us how to live. As the sun set, Buddy curled at my feet, content. He'd done his job, and so had we. And for the first time in a very long time, I was grateful for every scar, every bark, every bite. Because sometimes it takes losing your voice to finally be heard.